Hello, and welcome to Calming the Chaos, where we present tips, tools, and techniques to help you find peace in a chaotic world. I'm your host, Tracy Canella, licensed mental health counselor at Lokahi Counseling. This channel and the Calming the Chaos podcast is for those who want self-help and education. It's not a substitute for counseling or psychotherapy. So if you like the information, please subscribe to my channel and share it with your friends. Thanks so much for listening. And now, let the chaos begin. This episode of Calming the Chaos, I'm here with Colleen Mullen, and she is a psychologist, and she practices down in San Diego, California. She has a podcast called Coaching Through Chaos, and she's got a lot of ideas. In fact, that's why we call this episode Double Chaos, Double the Calm, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about some of the chaotic things that are happening in our world today and some of the ideas that she and I can brainstorm to be able to possibly calm some of the chaos. So welcome, Colleen. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the show, Tracy.
Absolutely. It's an honor. I have heard a lot of your podcasts and seen a lot of your work, and you just seem so professional. In fact, it's great. You have awesome music and all that stuff too.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So the intention is just to have you introduce yourself and what you do, what you do in your daily life and in your practice and in your podcasting. So if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Right. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and got a doctorate in psychology also, and have been in practice for myself for 14 years down here in San Diego. And my practice is also called Coaching Through Chaos because it stems around my doctorate work in chaos theory. And in addition to the therapy and the podcasting, I also wrote a book last year on leadership for women, and what else? And I write a lot for various sites around the internet. So professionally, I like to be involved in a lot of things. As we talk about this, I'm like, oh yeah, and I'm part of a development team now. Developing software to hopefully help revolutionize some aspects of the therapy training world. So we're working on an app right now that should come out by the end of the year or be ready for audiences by the end of the year. So professionally, I do like to get my hands in a lot of things. My work as a therapist focuses on a few things. So I work with people who a lot of times there's substance abuse issues, and then there's depression, trauma, anxiety disorders or conditions, and then relationship stress. I work with people a lot on their own relationships together with two people in the room, or sometimes it's a person who wants to figure out how to not keep having the same relationship over and over because it has not lasted, and so they want to figure out what's their pattern in relationships, and I help them work that out. So,
well, that's great because aside from the substance abuse disorders, I think we are almost parallel because I do eating disorders. I'm a certified eating disorders specialist, and I do depression, anxiety, trauma. Yeah. I also do hypnotherapy. So love that you bring that substance abuse disorder sort of expertise to the table here. I obviously there are people that come into my practice that have that, but I am definitely not a specialty area person in that area. So yeah, great.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, well, we're both versed in this overwhelm, and how I see it is like there's this problem that there are too many things that are very intense. And there are not enough things that are peaceful and calm. And I think that's the big picture of the way I see it.
That's coaching through chaos. I'm helping coach them through that chaos.
Yeah. Wow. And so what I see typically in my office is there's a system, right? And then somebody goes against it or doesn't get with the program. And they're usually the ones that are in my office. And
Mm-hmm.
the system tends to put the blame on the problem, but really the problem is just a symptom of something that's going awry in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so your mapping system is more of a systemic sort of approach to just really looking at all of the moving parts and looking at how they can move more smoothly together, it sounds like.
Yes, right. And so to understand that, like, you don't have to do crisis intervention for, a year with a client. You can go, like, let's build skills. Let's build the tolerance for this kind of stress. Let's set boundaries. Let's do all these other things that allows the person to then kind of bloom into someone who really understands that they've made a second order change, like that they really know that this problem is conquered for them.
Yeah. Well, and when we're thinking about the chaos that's happening in the world today, hearing most is that the kids are going back to school, but they're not actually going back to school. They're going on to online school. So the parents have got to be in charge of them because they're at home. And many parents have jobs and some of them are working at home. But that's a systemic change that is really interesting to look at in terms of practical things that are affecting most people here in the US. But when you look at it as a systemic sort of chaos, so something happens to where it's like the system was going this way until March of 2020. And then all of a sudden, we have this whole virus hit us, and then we have to have our kids home, and we're home, and how are we going to manage this? And so the system completely changes.
Yes.
How do you deal with something like that? Because that has been probably the most, I think, obvious sense of chaos that I have experienced from my clients in my practice. Like, how am I going to handle this change in the system?
Yes. And then even on, like, this is multi-systemic because it's the whole education system too. And I know that there are teachers, like I have access to a few teachers, and you talk to one and they're fine with it. You talk to another and they're terrified to be back in school. And another one wants to look at retiring early. I mean, like, everybody in these systems are looking at how are they coping with this change of trajectory, right? And so how I would work with the person is first look at what is the biggest obstacle that they're seeing to it happen, like, to be effective, right? What is the obstacle, right? And it may be just not being able to manage the kids and focus on their own work, or afraid that the kid isn't going to get the education they thought they were going to get this year. And then we look at, well, right now this is temporary, right? Nothing has changed permanently. So we also kind of calm things by staying very present focused. Today, this is what you need to do, right? And that's all you need to know about right now. And how do we get through today? And then you can look down the road at more problem solving. But in looking at this, we're literally seeing this play out where all of a sudden every system, families, school systems, businesses, everybody's looking at how do we do things differently. And some people will adapt easier than others. And that is going to be probably one of the most relevant skills to how well a person or a family thrives through this, or gets through this, survives even if they feel very fragile, is adaptability. Is what I...
When you said that, I just remembered when we did group therapy, we did a DBT group for eating disorders, and one time, and we noticed that everybody always sat in the same place. And so one day we just sort of said, everybody has to sit somewhere else. And we just sort of watched the freak out happen. And it's because of that lack of adaptability. It's kind of like we have this thing set in our minds that things are supposed to go a certain way. And then when they don't, we don't know what to do. So being, I guess, a flexible mind is probably what you're talking about, like people who can be more flexible or more like being able to take a step back, analyze the situation, and be able to get creative and figure out how we're going to actually keep the kids in line and how are we actually going to both work our jobs at home. And yeah, how are we going to deal with the Wi-Fi when it goes out? That's my main problem.
Yeah, and so right, the flexible mind and being able to see the alternative picture, right? Being able to see alternative answers or alternative solutions to a problem.
I think that the main thing is what you said before is that, you know, you define the problem and then you just see what's present in the here and now and today and what we can do to work with it to problem solve what we're going through. So I guess that sort of oversimplifies chaos, but if you can get your body calmed down enough to be able to just say, oh, that's right, there's like a 1, 2, 3 step sort of approach to this. I think a lot of people just sort of go into shock. I don't know if you've seen any of that, but you know, the whole fight, flight, or freeze, you know, we're going to be doing that stuff when we're faced with these adapting times that we're in right now.
Well, yeah, it's a trauma reaction. There's a lot of, and this is systemic trauma. There's individual trauma. There's all sorts of traumas happening, and that's why we're seeing, I think, so much when we see these big systems like an education system that still looks like they couldn't move into a solution, because we also have a bunch of humans who are being traumatized by this, and it registers in a certain way depending on what level of trauma a person's already had in life. There's a lot of people walking around with a lot more anxiety than they've ever had before. So yeah, the fight or flight and the fear of, there's another like a fear that like specifically for education. I know the fear on some people's parts is, if this works online, are we going to get stuck this way? So there's almost like a resistance to finding an accurate solution, because people are scared that like somehow it's going to change how kids are educated from here on out. That if the district likes it and it works, why would they bring them back? I'm hoping that there's really not a real threat of that happening. Kids still need socialization and all sorts of ways to, you know, learn new things and get other skills that school classes and after school programs and all sorts of things bring to them. But there is a fear going around that, like, if it is too good or easy or manageable, like, why would they change it now and just move to a new direction for education? So I think that we have like that paralysis going on too, the fight or flight, and then like, well, what if this actually works? Just like all the corporate stuff, they're adjusting, right? And so there's a lot of people that are saying, we're probably just going to let you have options of staying and working from home since it's working for people. But that's also very different than managing the kids at home.
Yeah, it's the state of the world. And so what you said was really important there, as far as like even expanding it out from the schools. The state of the world is in a state of adaptation and all of these things that are happening. And what we do to manage those things might be working, or might be like, okay, I can think of the whole mask wearing thing. You know, that's a big thing in Washington State. And so I was kind of a little shocked to just go to my corner store and there was all these signs about masks. And I had one, of course, but it was very interesting. One day I had to go and get some ice and there was all these signs, and I was thinking, it's a new world that we're living in, and we have to adapt to these arrows on our grocery store floors that tell us where to stand so that we won't be close to each other. Yeah. And there is a lot of fear. Plus, there's a lot of things to adapt to. A lot of people don't want to adapt to be safe. So I guess maybe what we're looking at is like safety and risk here on that continuum, you know, where you're going to be on that, if you're going to completely obey the law and completely be safe, or are you going to just say, I don't care. I'm going to do things the same way as I always have because I don't like adapting and risk getting sick. And so I think on a global level, and not just with schools, but with, anything that we have to do with going out in public these days, it's completely changed. And I think a lot of people are having problems adapting and having a lot of chaos about that.
Well, yes, and I think that you'll probably agree that like a lot of people come in for therapy because they don't like change, and there's a big change pending in their life, or they went through a big change and now they're all unsettled. So now that's what we're seeing when we see people who, whatever a person thinks of the mask wearing things, they're just being said, hey, do this for now, temporary, it'll help, right? Or we think it'll help, right? But just that idea of, here's different ways to do things, and not being able to go in stores if you don't have one, or not being able to go to school or your job or any of that with or without the mask, but just all of those changes, it pulls up a lot of that resistance, like we were talking about, like going back to what we know, and people don't. Generally, a lot of people don't like change. It makes them nervous. It makes them unsettled. And so this is just on such a big level. And then another factor is too, nobody's been through this before. This is one of the first times it's the only time in history that anybody would still be alive from, that we've had to have this global pandemic. And there isn't a guidebook. There isn't someone who's saying this is the solution to this problem. And so people are just hanging on for whatever bit of information works to fit into what makes sense to them. And that's where we get like a whole bunch of different opinions. I'm sure you're probably seeing that as well. Yeah.
So how do we get people to be more flexible? I don't know how. I've not been trained in acceptance and commitment therapy, but maybe you have. But
I haven't actually.
It has that whole like psychological flexibility component to it, to where the main goal is to develop that psychological flexibility. How we're going to do that, how we're going to help the person who usually sits in the third chair in the third row be able to sit in the fourth row in the fourth chair, or whatever it is. How we are going to be able to help people feel comfortable and safe with all of these changes. And I'm not really sure what the answer is. So that's kind of what I want to brainstorm with you. I think one of the things that just came to my mind was support. Like, I don't know that if a person doesn't feel supported, then when changes come along, they're not going to feel as firm on their feet as if they have good support systems, good resources, like good family systems, good friends, good spouses, all that stuff. So that's one of the ideas I had, just to be able to help people to feel better through all of these changes that we're going through. What about you? What's an idea that you have?
Yeah. When I think about that, I think of, support. And then often it's, and then we have a whole bunch of people in the world will be like, yeah, well, my family's not that accepting and whatever. So then it's like, well, just talking to someone about it, right? You have a friend, even if it's one person, right? You have some support, but talking about it is going to be very good until it's time to take a break, right? Like knowing when to stop actually talking about it is going to be a good thing as well. To say like, look, let's go for a walk tomorrow. Maybe you go for walks every day with your friends. You say, let's go for a walk tomorrow, but let's not talk about the virus. Let's find some other normalcy that's happening, right? Because in this, like always finding exceptions. When somebody thinks everything is changing, there's always something that's not. So, there's still, people are still like if you talk to your friend and said, oh, well, what'd you do last weekend? Oh, well, we binged some shows on Netflix. We went down to the park and went for a walk. We went down and walked by the water. We got dinner from a restaurant and brought it home and had it on the patio. All those things are things that you do in normal life. So like the whole world isn't changing, and that's why pulling it back keeps you very present. Like it's just today that all this other stuff is is in flux. And yes, to some people, everything about like their financial world and everything is so fragile. So even more so, for as much as it sounds maybe a little trite to say, oh, well, like find out like what your friends are binging on Netflix, it's important to pull yourself out of the despair. So having support, having friends, or just people that you can talk to about this, and then knowing when to take those breaks, I think is really helpful.
Right. What you're talking about is being like more grounded, like support and grounding. Like I know that even though some things are uncertain as far as COVID, as far as the upcoming presidential election, as far as unemployment, school closures, stock markets, sports events, I know that there is a tree outside of my house that is continuing to grow. And I know that every couple of, I know my calendar tells me when the full moon comes out, full moon will be there. And I do know that my eyes are brown, and, these things are just seemingly really simple, but they really can ground you when you think about like all this change. I love what you just said about like, so why aren't we focusing on things that are still the same, that aren't changing, that are continuous, and they are resources and help us to be grounded? Lavender still smells like lavender, right?
Right. And people are gardening and growing their vegetables, right? These things are still happening in the world, in our state, in our country. And kids are still learning. They might not be learning the same way, but they're still learning. The kids have homework, right? They're still learning. Really, we're talking about like just, being very present, mindful, grounded, to be able to say, well, I need to take a night off of like looking at this, hearing about this, talking about this, something like that. I've been advising some business owners on like kind of coming back to work after being shut down, or how do you just kind of work through this and keep morale up and help your employees feel cared about, and knowing not to like join in and commiserate on all the negative, right? Going and being able to look outside of all of that and say, well, I'm really grateful that we are here today. Even if you were shut down for 2 months and you've come back, there's something very positive in that. It might not feel the same, and it might not be as busy as it was if it's like one of the restaurant businesses or something, but there's a lot in this. I think I lost my little track of thinking, but there's a lot to be grateful in the present day, as well as looking at what is actually still going on, that has always gone on, that has not been interrupted.
Yeah, I like using the kind of ebb and flow. Like we continue to like, here's a crisis and then it kind of comes down. But I think people who expect it just to always be even flowing are sadly disappointed. And I think ebbs and flows are really expected. I did want to ask you a bit about how you talk about your past, present, and future sort of ways of looking at things. And I love the way that you describe it on your website as far as helping people through chaos is looking at the past and the future and seeing how those things can cause chaos and being able to help people enter into the present moment to calm their chaos. You want to say a couple words about that? I would love to hear more.
Sure. So, yes, all this stuff happened to you in the past, and it might affect how you are in today's world. And then we can look and see, what do you want, your future to look like? And then we start going, okay, then we have to start looking at how do you separate out those past things and be able to I always talk about them giving, how much more energy do you want to give the past? Like, I don't know, like traditional stuff, oh, your mother, you had a terrible relationship with your mother, but she's been dead 5 years already. Like, how much weight are you going to give the pain that relationship brought you to say, I don't feel good about myself, or I don't have a lot of confidence? Nobody's telling you you're a bad kid anymore. Nobody's telling you you're ugly anymore. And it's, obviously I do it in a little softer tone in session, but it's, it's looking at how much do you really want that to be the script that you carry with you into the future, right? Because it can change and it can feel different. And it's kind of getting, I think the map helps people buy into the fact that they can feel differently.
Mm.
And, and it's just a process of trial and error to see like what works to help that change get affected when it is something that is really like literally just caught in their thoughts like that, like an old script about who they are or what they thought they were capable of because of how they were treated when they were younger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we carry, I like little stats and things, but we in the book writing project, I was looking up, about women and self-esteem and stuff, and like women are in particular, like we get the self-concept that we have of ourselves when we're 12 lingers and stays the same throughout life, that even when they looked at women who were 45, they still had the same self-concept of who they were at 12. So if they were confident, if they thought they were, strong, if they were, thought they were smart, all those positives, they still kind of lived their life like that. If they didn't and they had whatever causes around them that ended up internalizing themselves as not worth much, or not, don't speak up, or you don't get to have a voice, or any of those things, or I'm shy, I'm timid, nobody likes me, I don't get picked first, all those negative scripts that we can carry on, that's what they still think of themselves at 45. That part fascinated me, and actually helps a lot of the work that I do with women. But it's this idea that I'm going to venture to guess men are probably around the same time. We would just look at like the age when those ideas get formed and how they stay with them. But so it's really rewriting old scripts and letting them know they could have a different experience in their environment.
Right. When we're talking about the past, and you say, how much energy do you want to keep for this? I think it's really valid to say you're at a choice point here. If you want to continue to hold this burden, or if you want to let it go, and it's a choice point, it really is. Yeah. And, whether they're going to agree with and continue to agree with the narrative that has been scripted for them in the past, or if they're going to disagree and write their own new narrative that's more empowering. I love that. So that's how the past part works. And then I know that future has to do a lot with chaos, as far as worrying or fearing that the worst is going to happen, the other shoe is going to drop. Possibly, just doing the self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. And so, how do you work with the future fears with your clients in this mapping system and past, present, future sort of way of looking at things?
Right. Well, and it's so funny. I talk about this question probably a couple of times a week with people. My favorite thing on earth to challenge a person is to say, well, like, what is the worst thing that would happen to you in this moment, right? And so if that's fearing, right, so then they say, well, I don't know, like so we'll use the substance abuse analogy, right? Like they make the changes, but they're not as connected to their family because their family maybe didn't do the buy-in. And I'll say, okay, and then what is going to be the worst thing about your life if it looks like that you have to interact with them differently? And they might say, well, then maybe they're not going to think I love them as much. I'm like, okay, well, you can fix that because you can tell them that you love them, right? Or maybe, I don't know, they'll be left out of things. Maybe they'll literally be shunned. Okay, and then what will that bring to your life by not getting invited by people who are supposed to love you, and getting shunned by them? Like, what will that do to you? Okay, and then you look for solutions to that. But what is the worst thing that can happen? What are you giving up? Right? I don't know if you know that. I don't even know if that's the miracle question, but what are you going to give up if tomorrow you wake up and you feel differently? If you were confident tomorrow, if you thought you were outstanding at what you did, if you weren't afraid to kind of go after that new career, like, what would you be giving up by not staying in this place of fear, right? So it's not just that they're going to give up the fear, right? This usually locks them in like in a weird way to some other weird reinforcer, right? Maybe they're afraid their marriage would fall apart because they're not sure their partner could handle them like working more or going after something, or maybe they're afraid that they're not going to be the best parent to their kids because they think it's selfish to go after a new career when their kids are, starting to grow up, right? There's a lot of things that people get worried about, and these reinforcers, these negative reinforcers, keep them locked in, and then it keeps them saying, oh, well, you need to do this because that makes you a good mom, rather than, well, I could do this and this, but it allows them to not have to do it, right? So,
yeah, well, you're getting into some existential issues where there's like, I know that you said, well, so what's the worst thing that can ever happen to you? And then it goes to death. I automatically, being sort of an existential person, just think about that. Well, okay, so basically they're going to say either humiliation or death.
Okay.
To be the worst thing that's going to be happening to me here.
And that might be, sometimes the worst that can happen is death, right? If you think you're doing something in an effort, even if it's just thinking a certain way, and you think by changing your thinking, someone or something that you love could pass away, right? Then we go through that and we say, okay, and then what happens after that, right? And if it's the person, I say, well, what is the worst that can happen to you if you change this thinking and it gets to death? And okay, well, then at that point, you just keep going through it. Like what, and then what, and then what, right? So you then are out of this. Others will adapt. They'll be sad and they'll adapt. But let's get to the rationality of like how death came up for you, right? Is that really where you're going to go with that? Is that really a rational possibility, right? And challenging maybe the existential angst that wants to just take over with death when you get presented with something that is scary. But what happens to someone who goes, well, if all of this happens, well, something will happen and I'll die. Okay, well, there's not much to adapt to after that, but we can challenge that and go and say, well, is that reality?
Yeah, there was, I believe it was either Aaron Beck or Albert Ellis, or maybe both of them. One of them said there was no catastrophes, and I remember when I heard that, I thought, what do you mean? There's no, in my mind, there's all kinds of catastrophes that could happen. There's that theory that, what is the worst that can happen? And so when you said that, it just reminded me of Beck or Ellis or both of them. And then the other thing that kind of came up for me is that when you do go down that road of catastrophizing, it's a creative mind, just trying to figure out what's going to happen, maybe be 1 or 2 or 7 steps ahead of the game, and being able to reframe that as, wow, your mind is really being creative. I can see how you can come to that conclusion. But what is the reality? The past is the best predictor of the future. And so in the past, you've always been okay, and you've been taken care of. You've had some hard times. You've gotten through them. Now what is happening is really super hard. But in the future, it doesn't have to be that catastrophe that you're dreaming up. Your creative mind is doing that. I love that. That's sort of a way of dealing with chaos in the mind, and that involves both, like all 3 dimensions: past, present, future. Of course, wanting to end up on the present, because here we are, right?
Yes.
we're going to all die someday, and that's the reality of the thing. But as we are living and breathing, then what is the most effective ways that we can live in our major life domains? How can we live best physically, socially, with family, professionally, occupationally, educationally, financially, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? Those are those major life domains that do get affected by these disrupts in, or these changes in society or in our world. So we just want to kind of reassure people that, it's going to ebb and flow. It's going to be okay. So I like that. So, what is your go-to chaotic sort of coping technique for your own self? Like when you start to feel yourself freaking out. Now, I'm going to go with
Uh-huh.
you too. So don't think that you're all alone here. And I'm just going to say, oh yeah, okay, you do you. But yeah, what is it? What do you do when there is something that just completely just knocks you for a loop? What do you do?
Yeah. Well, I often joke and say whiskey, but I don't. Clients laugh at that. I'm like, yeah, no, not really. But I really heavily rely on moving my body and as stress reducing, like going for walks, getting outside, breathing fresh air. I try to practice when I preach. I don't always do it as well as I'd like, but I do use like that as like a ritual grounding. I even use it in my relationship now, especially with COVID. We made that a ritual of like every day after work, we go for a walk somewhere. Sometimes it's our neighborhood, sometimes we drive to other neighborhoods, but using working out some of the energy that then allows me to think, because I am a high strung person and I have a tendency to hear something and go, whoop, what was that? And like go straight to 10 on the reactivity if I don't watch myself. And
Mm.
so I like to expel the energy and then go, and I'll think about it later. I try to, like, once I realize like I'm in that state of mind, I'm like, I have to do this later, and I will set it aside. I'll be like, where are we going to go today? Let's go for a walk. Let's go, like, or sometimes if I really need to, I'll do it myself, or I'll just say, give me 30 minutes of sitting on the patio and like, let me just escape for a few minutes and read something or do something before I want to get back into kind of rejoining or regrouping at home,
Mm-hmm.
So that's really super important to me. Movement and
Moving,
fresh air.
moving, breathing, and processing. Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah, it's just moving the body because that gets you out of your mind, right? I
Mm-hmm.
remember in hypnotherapy school, people were talking about get out of your mind and into your body because most people are so into their mind, and hypnotherapy does get you more into the body. So
Uh-huh.
those are great.
Yes.
I have had a lot of training in DBT, dialectical
Oh.
behavior therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Do tend to go back to this whole like kind of there's an app for everything. There's a skill for everything, right?
Yeah.
So when my clients come to me or when I have a problem, I sense my wheels turning like where is the skill? Is it a mindfulness sort of a deal? Is it emotion regulation? Is it distress tolerance? Is it, a relationship sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I do, like if something really threw me for a loop, like say one of these big, large trees here just sort of like started to topple down and broke the window, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a chaotic thing to happen.
That would be, yes.
But so you observe what happens, and then you sort of go into that fight or flight or freeze mode, and you notice the shock. So getting back into your body is so important. Breathing.
Yeah.
I love using scents. Like if
Mm-hmm.
it's telling me something really super traumatic or difficult, very sad, depressing, I'll get my orange oil out and I'll get my lavender oil. And I do have a scent that I spray around my office. I think I'd heard from DBT that the quickest way to ground yourself is through the sense of smell, but
Mm-hmm.
all five senses are good, visualizing something pleasant. And then, so then I would say, I would release that energy, like, maybe utter a couple expletives, but like try and keep myself safe, but energy release. And then I would talk to myself and say, you can do this. You've gotten through a lot of really hard situations in your life, Tracy. You can get through this tree crashing through your window. You're okay. You just got a couple scratches on your face, whatever, asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say I think this is from DBT too. I don't know which skill it comes from, but on prayer, just to be able to, even if prayer isn't to if you don't believe in God, but if you believe in just sort of shouting out to the universe to just sort of lend you a hand, like, come on,
Mm-hmm.
lend me a hand here. Like, please help me. I'm send, throw me a freaking boon here or something like.
Uh-huh.
I've said that so many times actually. And be able to just sort of ask for help either uh, from the people who are around you or spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I try and do. Other times I yell and scream and freak out and say, "Oh my gosh, my husband, help me! What's going on?" Because I'm very reactive. My mind is very reactive and creative and very reptilian. I guess that's the reptilian brain that takes over when there's an actual chaos that hits you, and you have to get everything together to be able to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And I don't know much about the formal DBT training, but I love what you were saying about the senses, because I'm often talking about any of the senses. There's, when I talk often about yes, smelling something, but I'll say just step outside. If you have even just a really unsettling point of the day, maybe you're just getting extra anxious, or you're even having a little bit of panic during the day, just kind of worried about things, step outside, breathe air, look for the colors. What do you see? What do you hear? What does the air taste like? Drink some water, notice what is going on. And then also you were talking about the body with the we were both talking about the body with movement and getting back in the body. And I also talk about start noticing your body, where are you carrying all this stress? What are you noticing, so that you can get out of the thought in your head that is keeping you, you're probably ruminating and stressed on something, right? It gives your body a break when you start noticing, because it's throwing the senses off and it's interrupting that connection. Oh, I'm worried about this. I'm worried about this. I'm worried about this. Oh, but wait, look at the pretty green leaves, and you can't have those two things at the same time. So it just interrupts you. And that is something that I share often with my clients, or remind them about, and say, well, sounds like that moment was really stressful, and you were saying you got anxiety, and how soon after that were you able to go and try that? Were you able to pull yourself out? And if you weren't, what were you holding on to that was so hard to stop thinking about for that minute, that you couldn't notice what it smelled like outside, or what the sun felt like on your skin, right? All of that.
Yeah. So how can you help yourself through it? And that has to do a lot with the self-talk. I think that I don't know which professor told me this, but it didn't come from me anyway, but I love using it with clients, is talk to yourself like you would talk to your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
Encourage your best friend through it. So talk to yourself in that same way, like you can do this, take another step, and being able to help yourself through things, because really, when it all comes down to it, you may not have somebody to help you, but you can have your own self-talk. You can have that positivity coming out of the chaos of whatever is happening. And smell the air, look at the sky, so there's the vision, there's the scent, there's the drink some water, all that stuff can really help ground a person. I think that was a pretty good lightning round of chaos, unless you have another sort of go-to skill. I love the five senses, actually, sight, sound, scent, hearing.
The only other one that I'd really recommend, right, there's all the senses, moving the body, right, talking and then taking a break, but also just getting outside and getting sunlight, because people are so depleted of vitamin D these days. They don't even understand how much just a little bit of sun that maybe you were getting when you parked your car at the end of the parking lot at the office and then walked in, you had 3 minutes of walking, or a minute even of walking, that you're not getting anymore, that you haven't gotten for 6 months. Just how quickly, because most people are right now, I'm hearing a lot of my clients are oh, well, a doctor did tests and I'm deficient in vitamin D. I'm yeah, right. And all it takes then is supplementing themselves, but just getting it naturally is so good. Vitamin D, though, just help, from the sunlight, right? It helps your mood, it helps you with sleep, it helps with stress management, which also the moving of the body does all of that too, right? And so, but there's this opportunity, right? People are working from home or are home, and the sun is still shining, right? There's that other thing. Like, the sun is still shining, the beaches are still there, some people's pools are open, and there's opportunity to just get outside and still, be in touch with that part of the world, which is kind of like innocent and pure, because it's beautiful, right? And so that can be so cathartic, but doing all of that while you're, getting a walk in while you're outside will also help, decrease the amount of stress that you're actually feeling. It gives you more of a container for that. It can help you sleep because you're also not stressed as much, right? And improve the mood.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that sunlight thing too. Well, we're in Washington State, where we have like all kinds of rain, and if it's San Diego, oh my goodness. Yeah, we've got a lot of depression up here in Washington, seasonal affective disorders and such. But what do you have to say about those happy lights? Or what I have is a dawn simulator alarm clock, which I'm going to have to start using pretty soon, because it used to be light at 5 o'clock in the morning up here, and now it isn't light until like 7. So what do you have to say? Like happy lights, those light sort of therapies, and even like a dawn simulating alarm clock to wake you, sort of usher you into the day.
Yeah. I think when you're talking like Washington State and the rain and the gray, months that you go into, right? I'm a former New Yorker, and I left because I did not like the winters. I would get not really depressed, but that seasonal affective, something was just off, and I was like, I want to go live in the sunshine. So I know everybody can't just up and move to San Diego. So on that end, yes, I think I don't know a lot about them, but what I do know is that, like, if you are going to be months away from like really getting a sufficient amount of direct sunlight, you need to supplement that, right? And so investing in some kind of therapeutic light on that way certainly can be helpful. I know there are a lot of people out there practicing with the light therapy. The dawn simulation, I love that. I'm wondering, I don't know who actually wakes up to that. I know I probably couldn't.
I set my light on a bright white, and so I do wake up to that. And then there's these they used to be soothing, but then now they're annoying birds chirping, and so I get a sound and a light, and then the birds start chirping when the alarm comes on.
Oh, I like that. It sounds very soft and delicate, and I think, gosh, I might sleep through that one.
I'm going to have to start using it again, because I'm getting up way too late because of the darkness. But
you mentioned sounds. I think Sound Machine is another good little trick, and they don't even need an actual machine, although you can buy them and plug them in. But your phone has apps. There are definitely white noise apps, and there's plenty of free ones out there, and you can have any range of like 20, 30 different sounds on these things that range from, like, my personal favorite is the airplane cabin, because when I sit in an airplane, I fall asleep before we even take off. I have no fear of flying because I won't even know I was in the air. So like, that's what I use to sleep. It puts me out on a night when I really just can't. I put that on. But other people, for calming themselves when they're agitated, put on the soft little chirping birds or the running water, or just they have vacuums, fans, all those just general white noises. If you want to just kind of like shut yourself out from the world, pick a sound that you can just hone in on and listen to, and it gets very hypnotic, and you get a nice little break. And because there's a lot of people out there, everybody's out there, all the coaches and stuff are talking about like, oh, meditating and doing something creative and all that stuff. And I think people are feeling a lot of pressure that if they're suffering during this time, or they're not feeling like they really want to be creative, or they really want to, now is not the time for them to meditate because they're just too overwhelmed. This is a way to take a break from the, in the mind, without putting the pressure on yourself that you literally have to sit in silence and get to the point where your mind doesn't actually think about anything or notice anything. You can distract it and allow yourself to get into a little bit of a hypnotic or a trance-like state for a few minutes, and just hone in on the sound and let that just kind of calm your insides for a few minutes.
I did not know. I did not even think about white noise apps. And so I fall asleep to the purring of my cat and the snoring of my husband. So maybe I should check into that.
They have that. I have a sister I take care of, and she lives with me, and I turned her on to the white noise apps, and my partner came out the first morning after he went in, made coffee, and she's still sleeping on the other side of the house. And he's like, gosh, because I didn't know she snored so loud. And I went out and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the purring cat on the white noise app, but she sleeps with it very loud. But it's, I wasn't snoring.
Okay, so if there's a purring cat,
there is.
Saw you should maybe watch my last podcast, and actually you should watch it on YouTube because it's so adorable with my cats. But yes, if there is a purring cat, white noise, I am all over that for sure.
I will make sure to email you the link to that app so that you can even put it with your show notes if you want, for the listeners. Oh, yeah. It's a free app, and it has all these, like, it must have 25 different sounds you can pick from. But one of them that she honed in on was the snoring cat, which was really funny.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate you being here. I guess the sort of the takeaway is there's too much. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's very intense. And so what the goal is here is just to be able to sort of scale it down and not make it so intense. And so your mapping system and looking at past, present, future, being able to use some of the skills that we talked about today to calm the chaos, and coaching through chaos. Do you want to talk about your podcast and maybe make a little plug for your website or anything that you want to promote?
Well, thanks. So, sure. So people can find me to work with me at coachingthroughchaos.com. And I am right now, I'm doing a lot of therapy, but I'm also doing a lot of we'll call small to medium business consulting, to helping people I help them generally in like employee turnover and improving customer service and the systemic dynamics that go on there. But lately it's been talking about how to get back to business either through the pandemic or post-pandemic. We thought it was going to be post-pandemic, but it's through the pandemic. And but the podcast is Coaching Through Chaos also, and you can find it all on the same site if you like, or any of the regular podcast listening apps. And I've been doing that since 2015, and I have other people on. They're very often authors or people who are experts at what they do and have put their ideas down on paper, or they are people who have overcome these, tremendous obstacles in life and have something to say about how they manage their lives on the flip side of that chaos. And so that's been running since 2015, and October 1st, I'm actually launching the Patreon for that, where for a small, and I don't act as the expert on that show. I hold on people who are the experts at what they do. But on October 1st, when I launch the Patreon, I'm going to be releasing 3 self-help recordings as the extra content that a person will get for signing up for like a mid-level tier on the Patreon. It's still it's under $10 a month. And so that's there. And if anybody wants, I will email you the link to my free download of my book. It's called the 60-Day Plan for Embracing Your Inner Leader. It's a leadership workbook for women. So I did this, obviously, write books, and we think, oh, we want to sell them, and it's going to do so well. And then I did some retooling of the book. I actually didn't like what I first released, and I did some retooling, even renamed it a little bit, repackaged it a little bit, and decided that, I don't even, yes, people can buy it on Amazon, but I don't even really care about that. I just wanted it to get in as many hands of women as possible. And so I have been posting a free download link where they can download an online version of the book. And so it is a workbook. It takes them through 10 chapters of great traits of successful women. And then it goes through some exercises in each little chapter about, like, how would you think about this, or what would you do in this situation? Who are you thinking about when I say about talking to a mentor? But then there's an actual 60-day mapping plan, funny mapping, right? Mapping plan for if they do those things along the way, and there's in those 60 days, they will be on their way to feeling much more confident and feeling like more of a leader. And it can be in business, but it's also like a person who just wants to feel more empowered, right? And because we have a lot of people that just would like to feel stronger in their own skin, or more empowered, or more confident in their own skin. And really, the book can be for any woman, really. And I'm going to put out the men's version next year, but the women's is out now, and it can be downloaded for free.
That would be amazing if you could offer that to our listeners, because, I know Tara Brock does the same thing. She offers up so many free resources, and I do that too with my CD and some of the tracks that I have are on my podcast, and people can just listen to them. But I love that you have that for free and that you're willing to share it with us. That sounds so cool, for sure.
Great. I will definitely get all of that to you when we hang up, right? And so I'll get that to you before it goes live.
Absolutely. Just
yes,
get it to me and I add it to the notes, and that's how it goes, right?
Great.
So, yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. I know your time is very valuable, and thank you so much for being with us today and helping us to learn. It's sort of calming the chaos over the top, I think,
Well, I like that. Thanks. So thanks so much for having me on, Tracy. I really enjoyed this.
You're welcome. All right. Bye-bye. Okay. Thank you for listening to Calming the Chaos. If the information in today's podcast was helpful, please consider subscribing and share it with your friends. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. You can also go to my website at www.lokahicounseling.com for more resources for calming your mental and emotional chaos. This includes a CD I created that teaches you how to practice mindfulness in less than 10 minutes. So check it out. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing my next podcast episode with you. In the meantime, take care.